Warning, there will be some constructive criticism of this fight. I just put out the disclaimer to you all. I just let the cat out of the bag. I will be putting on my critic cap, if you will, for this fight featuring Chris Weidman and Derek Lewis, which is the co-main, or Chris Weidman and Derek Lewis, Chris Weidman and Jacare Souza. My bad. Chris Weidman, you know, I'm a fan. I've admired his career from afar. I've met the man 2 separate occasions. He was nothing but great, nothing but a nice guy. And it pains me to say a lot of what I'm going to say in this episode of the Thomas Take Sports podcast and this part of the UFC 230 coverage of the Thomas Take Sports podcast, brought to you by the podcast known as the Thomas Take Sports podcast. I don't know, guys and girls. I don't know. I've watched a lot of fights. I've watched thousands of fights throughout the last 15 years, 16 years, 17 years, whatever you want to call it. I'm 26 years old. I've been watching fighting since the days of Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis, okay? Boxing, MMA, Muay Thai. You can go through the laundry list of disciplines in fighting that I've watched a lot of. You can thank UFC Fight Pass for that. But I've never seen a fight where you have one fighter who's dominantly winning the fight. Landing good punches, landing good kicks, and is inviting himself to more contact, to eat punches that are not even supposed to be attempted by his opponent, and to just allow his opponent to get back into the fight and ultimately to knock him unconscious on the mat, which was a pain to see, by the way, on my end. That knockout was very, very disturbing to watch. And I'm not one of those guys that says, oh, the knockout's real disturbing to watch and this and that. But that was a disturbing one because it wasn't supposed to happen. Furthermore, this guy's got a family, he's got a wife, he's got kids. They know that going in there. But watching them take that punishment, knowing that after the fact, is tough for me. Because the guy's a nice guy. I've met him multiple times, and I'm not saying that in a way like, oh, this guy's my friend, like Stephen A. Smith does about Tim Tebow. But what I'm saying is, what I'm offering to you all is that you look back at Chris Weidman's career. His 2 biggest wins were that of 2 of the biggest fights of his career. They're not going to get any bigger than that. And that was 2 fights against Anderson Silva. And his fights against Anderson, one was a knockout victory in which Anderson got cocky. He was putting his hands down. He was doing the showboating and everything. And Chris Weidman clipped him. It's a famous knockout. It's probably one of the most shocking upsets in UFC history. And the second Anderson Silva fight was a TKO victory for Weidman, and where Chris Weidman checked a leg kick from Anderson Silva, and Anderson snapped his leg, and that was the end of that fight. It was a freak accident. It lent itself to being a year-long injury for Anderson Silva. You wonder, as time has gone on, and I hate to say this, but you wonder, with the performances that we've seen from Chris Weidman since, or lack thereof, were those performances versus Anderson a fluke? The division at the time, very slim pickings in terms of contenders for Anderson. Anderson was on top of the world. Really, you wondered at the time, why wouldn't Anderson why would Anderson not take Chris Weidman seriously? And although he got knocked out, you wonder, why should he have taken Chris Weidman seriously? Before that knockout, why should Anderson Silva have taken Chris Weidman seriously? Because Chris Weidman hasn't shown many impressive performances since those two fights. Granted, he defended the belt against Lyoto Machida, but I will also throw you that Machida is in Bellator now. He's not even in the UFC. I'll also throw you that Chris Weidman defeated Vitor Belfort. Vitor Belfort. Those that are really hardcore fans in the MMA circles would know that Vitor Belfort was probably the Jose Canseco of MMA. And we all know what Jose Canseco was to baseball. And if you don't, basically I'm saying that Vitor Belfort is the biggest cheater that the sport of MMA has ever known. In an era where cheating was legal, much like Canseco with steroids in baseball, you get the point. They manipulated the system to the point of gross levels. And Vitor did just that. So to say that Chris Weidman beat up a man that was basically using performance-enhancing drugs for the majority of his career, and then when it was finally realized and he was forced to stop, Chris Weidman beat that guy. Not the guy that was on the performance enhancers, the guy that was like Stewie after he took steroids on Family Guy where his arms were sagging to the floor. That's the guy that Chris Weidman beat. And I'm not taking anything away from Chris Weidman, but there are facts in these statements. There are true facts. I mean, I'm laying out history for you guys. And when the division really got better, when you saw the division get better with guys like Luke Rockhold, you saw what Luke Rockhold did to Chris Weidman. I will throw this out there. I know Weidman took this fight on short notice, but if Chris Weidman was standing across from Luke Rockhold tonight, it would not have ended in the third round like this fight did tonight. It would have ended much quicker than that. Chris Weidman would probably have been finished within the first round by Rockhold tonight. I'm not saying that as if Luke Rockhold is this end-all, be-all force. We saw Luke Rockhold get starched by Michael Bisping. We saw Luke Rockhold get starched by Yoel Romero. We saw Luke Rockhold almost get starched by David Branch. But Chris Weidman is not the same guy. I said it days before the fight in a discussion on Facebook with my man Armani Rosati. Shout out to him. But Chris Weidman is not the same guy. And I also throw the question, who is Chris Weidman? We don't know who Chris Weidman is because the plight of his career was based off of one man's arrogance. And I hate to put it that way because it does sound like I'm discrediting him, but it's just pure fact. Had Anderson Silva took that fight seriously 5 years ago, would he have knocked Chris Weidman out? I think so. I think that's fair. He took it seriously the second time, and this freak accident was what took place afterwards. So ultimately, I felt like it was great that Weidman was winning those fights because I felt like Anderson Silva never really appreciated being the champion anyway. But you got to wonder now. I mean, my buddy David Poole, I love him. God bless him. But he threw out the fact that Weidman's last victory was an impressive one. And I said, against Kelvin Gastelum? Kelvin Gastelum is not even a UFC middleweight. The fact that Kelvin Gastelum is getting a title shot is just ridiculous in terms of the UFC middleweight division. The UFC middleweight division is a mess of a division. It really is. I feel like there's a wave of youth coming in with guys like Israel Adesanya, guys like Paulo Costa, who I think could eventually be a long-time champ in the UFC. Paulo Costa. Darren Till is moving up in weight. There's guys that are coming up, but in terms of the true 185ers, that division is in shambles right now. The champion is hurt. It's not looking good for that division. It's not thriving right now. Jared Cannonier fought David Branch. I believe it was actually at light heavyweight, if I'm not mistaken. So Branch isn't even fighting at middleweight anymore. So there's a lot to take in there. And I'm not trying to really throw shade at Chris Weidman. I'm really not. I'm a fan. I am a fan of this guy. I'm saying this as a fan, that was one of the worst performances I've seen of a fighter that's winning a fight. It was every which moment, that fight could have been easily finished. Jacare Souza was flat on his feet, practically standing tall, waiting to be knocked out. And Chris Weidman just wasn't willing to finish the fight. I don't know why, but it was almost as if he thought, the longer I keep him in here, the quicker I'll finish him, because he's getting tired. Jacare Souza is not a guy that you let continue to fight, because the guy has a heart of a lion, the chin of granite. The moment you see him wobble, you have to finish him. You can't lay on him. You can't clinch him. And that was the worst part. When you have a fighter finished, the first thing I would think not to do is clinch him. The first thing I'd think to do is either punch, kick, elbow, knee his head off. That's the first thing I would think. Do whatever I got to do to send his brain against his skull and back again. And that's it. And that is the only game plan I'd have, is that I'm going to try to hurt him faster than he tries to hurt me. And if I hurt him before he tries to hurt me, I'm going to finish him. But Chris Weidman's plan was, I'm going to keep him in there, look to land some really good shots, and I'll point Jacare Souza. It was not a good game plan, because he got 15 minutes. That meant that Chris Weidman had to also avoid the big punches and the clinching of Jacare Souza. You're trying to clinch with a Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter that trained with your former opponent in Anderson Silva. He knows what's on the docket. He knew what was coming. And Jacare was very successfully able to weather the storm, put out a really prideful performance, but that was a fight that Chris Weidman gave to Jacare Souza. He gave him a win. He gave him a possible performance of the night bonus. And I haven't watched the post-fight press conference yet, but I would assume that might be what happens. That Jacare Souza does get the post-fight bonus. Performance of the night bonus. We'll see. I don't know. But you really wonder, where does Chris Weidman go from here? I honestly don't know. I think his best days are behind him. I say get out while you can. You have no reason to continue to fight. You did it. You won the title. Hang him up. Spend time with your family. Get into broadcasting. You'd be great at it. And just accept it for what it is. And that's it. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Chris Weidman, I love you. I'm only saying this because I truly believe it. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. Take care.